structure of vaccines, they start with selecting a new viral strain every year. Every year they have to come out with a new flu shot. There's 2 strains of influenza A and there's 1 strain of influenza B. So they have to pick these strains from somewhere. And it's a very scientific process. They picked the 3 strains that were most common causing flu in Southeast Asia last year. That's how scientific it is. And they sort of look around and say, is there anything new? Is there anything else that we need to put in here? And if there is, well, maybe we will change it a little bit. So they pick those 3 viruses, and then after they pick them, they have to process them for use. So ostensibly, the virus that's going to be in the flu shot is supposed to match the virus that's out in circulation, which, by the way, is an oh, by the way, it only matches about 16% of the time. But it matches even less than that if you consider the fact that when they take that virus from Southeast Asia, they have to mix it together with a virus that absolutely has to grow well in eggs, because not every virus that is an influenza virus will grow well in eggs in order to harvest it. So they mix these together. So from the very beginning, you've got a false premise. The virus that's in the flu shot isn't going to necessarily match the one that's out in circulation, and just because it's such an unscientific process. And then the other part of it is they mix it with these other viral genes so that you get a brand new virus, and sometimes there's up to 250 viruses that they actually pick from that end up to be the one that's in the flu shot. So how is that going to create an antibody and do anything to protect you from something that's out there in the environment? The next thing that they do is they do this thing with eggs, they call it candling. And the manufacturers of flu shots, mostly Novartis, but also GlaxoSmithKline and Merck, they order millions of eggs every year to go through this process, because 1 egg creates 1 vaccine. And they go through this process called candling, where they actually hold the egg up to a light, or they have a light that goes through the egg, because they have to see that there's a developing chicken embryo on the inside of the egg in order to use it. And if there's not a developing chicken embryo, that egg gets discarded. Because what they do then is they pick off the little top of it, like that you see there on this picture. They pick off the top, they inject a little bit of virus in there, because viruses have to be inoculated into living tissues in order for them to replicate and have enough viral solution in order to go on and process it to make a vaccine. So they stick a little bit of virus in that egg white, which is actually in there, and then they glue it shut. And they put it in an incubator, and about 11 days later, they extract it. And when they extract that egg white, they have to centrifuge it, sometimes several times, to remove chicken blood and tissue from what they've extracted. There are always egg proteins and foreign chicken viruses that we're going to talk about in a few minutes in this solution. And this is why for many, many years they talked about the fact that if you had a very severe egg allergy, you should not get a flu shot, because there are residual egg proteins that are in that flu shot. However, in about the last 4 to 5 years, they've been peppering the medical literature with these studies that say, if you get anaphylaxis from eggs, you can still get a flu shot as long as it's under medical supervision. Like some human being standing there in a white coat magically keeps you from going into anaphylactic shock. But I'm not kidding that really is the case, because previously people could be exempted from getting flu shots by saying, I've got a really bad egg allergy. That isn't holding up so much anymore because of these new papers that have been published. So after they go through that whole manufacturing process of sucking out the egg white and centrifuging off the chicken parts and blood, now they process it and they put these chemicals in it. There are always chicken proteins like we talked about. There are avian stealth viruses that we're going to talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. They are also sometimes using a particular type of cell called MDCK cells, which comes from dogs, that we'll talk about in a few minutes. They put antibiotics in it because all of these things are unsterile. They come from a human product. And so there are bacteria that are found in flu shots. And so frequently they put the antibiotics in there in order to kill off the bacteria. They use these 2 types of chemicals that are supposed to be stabilizers. They use a detergent which separates the antigens on the surface of the virus so your immune system can recognize it a little bit better. They put a steroid in it, hydrocortisone. They put MSG into the nasal flu mist, the one that they squirt up your nose. Now, how many of your patients have sensitivities to MSG? How would they like to have MSG squirted up their nose to give them a really bad headache? Because that's exactly what happens. The MSG is a stabilizer that they use in the flu mist. They use something called polysorbate 80, which is a flowing agent that's frequently used in food products, and a lot of times it's used in frostings and cakes. And multiple repeated doses and exposures to polysorbate 80, which comes through flu shots, sometimes comes through DPT vaccines, and is certainly in the Gardasil vaccine. There has been documented evidence that repeated exposures to polysorbate 80 causes anaphylactic shock. There's sugar in it as a stabilizer, and I've often wondered if by injecting sugar into the body, does the body look at that differently than if we eat sucrose, and do they develop an antibody to that? And is that kind of contributing to our obesity issues and also to maybe our diabetic issues? Synthetic vitamin E, and people might say, well, maybe that's kind of good, we're getting a shot of vitamin E, but the answer to that is no, because vitamin E is an oil. And anytime you inject an oil into the body, it causes a highly, highly inflammatory response that can cause all types of autoimmune disorders. And in fact, vitamin E is used in this adjuvant called ASO3, and if you know anything at all about adjuvants, they can cause a lot of problems, such as there's a lot of gelatin, which is a stabilizer. The vaccines that have the highest concentration of gelatin in them are MMR, chickenpox, and the shingles vaccine. That goes into the system, highly inflammatory, can cross the blood-brain barrier and cause brain inflammation immediately. And yes, there's still mercury in the flu shots. The multi-dose flu shots, people that may get at work, like at a hospital, or that they probably give you at Walgreens or CVS or places like that, the multi-dose vials that you can get 10 shots out of one vial, you have to shake it up because there's mercury as a preservative still in those shots. So manufacturers are kind of moving away